Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I am Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today is episode 7. We are moving into our CIA series. We just finished our Hillary series last week. Ironically, Hillary was born in 1947 and the CIA was also born in 1947. We'll get into that later. First, I wanted to share a story with you. Last year, April 2nd to be exact, I was helping someone clean out a townhome for their father who has dementia and had to unexpectedly vacate his property. Down in his basement, there were many items: furniture, bedding, pillows, DVDs, CDs, all kinds of things, games. I opened up a tote, and in the tote was this magazine. I knew the significance of this magazine, and rather than letting it get thrown in the trash, I took it home with me, and this is what started everything. This is what started my entire collection of George magazines and this series. Fast forward to October of 2021. I had the pleasure of meeting Vincent Fusca at a Patriot event. Ever since then, we've kind of just kept in touch. As you all know, Vincent likes to wear George magazine t-shirts, almost as if we should look into them perhaps. Since then, I've added to my collection every couple weeks or so. I just add 2 more. Now I'm up to 41. Please don't judge me. I know I'm like the crazy cat lady of George magazines, but they just fascinate me. I think they're incredible. And hey, I get to read cool stories to you and make a series out of it. Fast forward again to February of 2022. I get a package on my front step, and it is this shirt from Vincent Fusca. This is the shirt he wore in the Stop the Steal March. I'm incredibly honored to have this in my possession, clearly. I will take very good care of it. But I just wanted to share with you how I got started with the George magazines, why I started this series in the first place. The short answer is I just find these magazines fascinating. These magazines seem like they foretold the future back in the mid-1990s. I think they're a wealth of information. I've learned a ton about politics. I've learned a ton about different people who are still in office today. Things that are probably scrubbed from the internet that we would never find. So I find them absolutely fascinating. Obviously, if you're watching this, you find them a little bit interesting. So I thank you, viewer, for watching and giving me a chance to share my passion for these magazines. Now let's move on to the magazine for today. Like I said earlier, this is the CIA series. This is the first of 4. This magazine is from October of 1997. The inaugural issue came out in October of 1996. If you're wondering why he started the magazine series in October, you wouldn't be alone. I thought the same thing. Well, October, if you're into gematria, is 78. 78 is also Kennedy. It's also start. It's also Genesis. So what better time to start than October? The cover of this magazine features Elizabeth Hurley. There's a lot of different articles I'm going to be referencing in here because they're shorter in nature, so I'm just going to highlight a bunch of them. If you thought highly of the CIA prior to reading this magazine, chances are when you were done reading it, you wouldn't have that same opinion. The cover says the CIA, Secrets and Lies, and I would say 95% of the articles in here are about that and not so much about their triumphs. Ironically, this is the 2nd anniversary. It actually says 2nd anniversary issue, and it talks about the spy issue, the CIA, Secrets and Lies. I also have the 3rd anniversary issue, and it talks about dark secrets, how the Pentagon spied on the president. So it's kind of interesting that each anniversary, or at least the first 2 anniversary issues, are talking about the Pentagon and the CIA and Secrets and Lies, almost as if he's highlighting it. Just my thoughts. To begin today's episode, I'll be starting with the editor's letter written by John Kennedy Jr. himself. 'Tis the season for anniversaries. As the Ides of October come round, George marks its 2nd year on newsstands, while the Central Intelligence Agency celebrates 50 years in the Sneaky Pete business. Perhaps some forced and humorless comparison between us and them might be in order, but it would probably inspire you to do something with this all-star issue other than read it. Maybe wrap a fish in it or roll it up and spank your dog. And then you would never learn about some fascinating secrets and scandals from the past 50 years of the CIA. The agency was founded just after World War II, when it became clear that the U.S. lacked the means to fight the new Cold War that had broken out with the Soviet Union. The huge but dormant war machine the U.S. had developed in the post-war years was ill-suited to this new kind of engagement. Given the kind of government he ran, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had a distinct advantage over the earnest Americans when it came to gathering intelligence clandestinely. 50 years later, the CIA is struggling to adapt to a post-Cold War world. Pecking around for secrets at embassy functions doesn't seem to reap the rewards it used to. Satellites now gather much of the surveillance, and the grand mission of the agency remains largely undefined. The public is left instead with such unsettling images of our grand agency as those revealed in the recent campaign finance hearings. Senior agency officials confessed that they spent hours providing 37 separate confidential briefings to a mid-level Department of Commerce official named John Huang. Such is the Cold War in a global economy. But don't fall for the easy trap of cynicism. The CIA isn't set up to do slick PR, and its mission isn't warm and fuzzy. As you'll find inside, it's been a fascinating 50 years, and some of the agency's greatest successes may remain secret forever. Now that we've got a little history of the CIA, let's move into the first article I wanted to highlight, which is about Frank Olson. It's called The Frank Olson File, the CIA's Bad Trip. In 1953, Eric Olson heard the kind of horrible news that would shatter any 9-year-old. His father had died violently, having fallen 13 stories from the window of a Manhattan hotel room. The death was ruled a suicide, the result of his dad's recent struggle with depression. Not until Eric was 31 and a clinical psychologist did he learn that Frank Olson had unwittingly taken LSD as part of a CIA mind control experiment 9 days before his death. A 1975 apology from President Gerald Ford followed. Now, with Manhattan DA Robert Morgenthau's help, Eric Olson hopes to prove his father did not jump out of the window after all. Frank Olson toiled as an Army germ warrior, a scientist who develops lethal viruses and toxins for military use. Just before Thanksgiving 1953, Olson and colleagues were summoned to a CIA Army retreat at a secluded camp in western Maryland. Minutes after drinking Cointreau cocktails, the men were told that they had just been dosed with LSD. The Korean War had ended months before, and the feds were analyzing why so many captured Americans had spilled secrets in captivity. The CIA, suspecting chemical persuasion, wanted to study LSD's effects. Frank Olson became one of the agency's experimental monkeys. Immediately after the retreat, Olson sunk into a depression. "I've made a terrible mistake," he told his wife, and then asked his boss for a new post. His boss phoned Robert Lashbrook, a CIA retreat attendee, who then rushed Olson to Manhattan to see a special doctor, the agency's LSD expert. After 2 days, they registered Olson in a psychiatric hospital. He died the night before he was to be admitted. In 1994, Frank Olson's body was exhumed by James Starrs, a top forensic scientist. "We were told we couldn't see the body after he died because of its condition," says Eric Olson, "so I was surprised to see how good he looked. He was embalmed, and I still recognized him 40 years later." According to Starrs' investigation, completed this year, there were no signs of cuts or abrasions from broken glass. What Starrs did find was a severe bruise on Olson's forehead, not enough to have resulted from the fall, but enough to have knocked him unconscious. "There's a strong probability, based upon our findings, of criminal wrongdoing," Starrs says. This October, prosecutors are investigating the old evidence through a new historical cases unit. Lashbrook and his bosses, former CIA Director Richard Helms and mind control expert Sidney Gottlieb, are expected to be questioned. "By the time this is over, you will know how your father really died," a New York prosecutor told Olson. "The implications kind of frighten me," says Olson, "but the story has just never checked out. After 43 years, I feel like I'm back where I was at 9 years old, scratching my head." For any of you who have done a little research into the CIA and know what MK Ultra is, this seems to ring a bell. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look it up. Let's move on to the second story I wanted to highlight. Again, these are just short little snippets, so I thought I would share 3 or 4 with you. It's an unalterable rule of Washington. Every political scandal has a CIA component. So inevitably, the visual highlight to date of the Senate campaign finance hearings has been a CIA official, John Dickerson, testifying from behind an opaque screen, the same one that once shielded the likes of Sammy the Bull Gravano. Assigned to the Commerce Department, Dickerson served steadfastly as John Huang's CIA briefing officer. Huang is, of course, the one-time commerce official whose over-ardent efforts as a 1996 Democratic fundraiser helped trigger the probe into the Asian money connection. Since Huang was a mid-level political appointee far from the front lines of freedom, the Thompson Committee rightly demanded to know, why did Huang receive 37 separate secret CIA briefings? The answer says as much about the CIA's desperate quest for an economic mission in the post-Cold War world as it does about Huang himself. Huang, it turns out from testimony, was one of 100 commerce officials who routinely read raw CIA intelligence reports. Dickerson described the standard procedures for briefing Huang. I would bring the intelligence to his office. We would close the door. I would sometimes make a few comments about what I had brought to him to review, and he would generally read the reports. What Senator Joe Lieberman called the keystone cop quality of this CIA reading group was that Dickerson had no idea that Huang's official duties consisted of little more than counting paper clips. A Clinton official who received briefings akin to Huang's assured me, "This stuff is almost worthless. It's a lot of gossip adding up to nothing." And it must have been, since the Commerce Department's liaison with the CIA revealed that Huang had resisted applying for a higher security classification because it's too much work and it's too much money. Maybe the real reason was that Huang couldn't endure sitting through any more tedious CIA briefings. At the bottom of this page, there's another little highlighted section called the Great Blackout. And this is regarding declassified documents and why, when they become declassified, they're still all blacked out. It's very interesting. I'll read this too. Wielding a black magic marker in the name of national security, the CIA continues to guard its secrets from public scrutiny. The cable at left is an example of a declassified record. Beneath the heavy excisions, this 1995 CIA intelligence report tells part of a story of the 1983 death of Father John Carney, an American priest in the Honduran jungle. The CIA and the Honduran government say that Carney died of exposure. His family believes that there is evidence that he was tortured and killed at a Honduran base that the CIA maintained for the Nicaraguan Contras. Under public pressure, the CIA released 36 heavily censored documents to the victims' relatives last March. By refusing to declassify any part of the document, the CIA has kept Carney's family and the public in the dark. The next little piece I wanted to highlight was from an article called "The Top 10 Spy Operations," and it goes from 1 through 10. Well, on the second page of it, there's a face that seems rather familiar, so I looked into him. His name is Donald McLean, McLean. He looks very familiar. The name Donald McLean sounds like a singer, Don McLean, and he sings American Pie. If you don't know what American Pie, the song, is about, you should definitely research that. It discusses the music industry's fall from innocence to evil. I'll put the picture of who I'm talking about on the screen so you can see who he resembles, and you can make up your own mind. My last little bit that I was going to share with you today is called Big Brother's Little Helper. When Richard Nuccio blew the whistle on the CIA, he was blackballed by the agency. Now the president threatens to veto a new bill to keep other employees from talking. What doesn't Clinton want you to know? The article begins. On February 25, 1997, I resigned from the Clinton administration. My act of conscience was the second most difficult decision I made as a senior Clinton official on Latin American affairs. The first came on March 17, 1995, when I told then Representative Robert G. Torricelli that I had unintentionally misled Congress about the CIA's activities in Guatemala. Because of a CIA cover-up, I had not known the truth, that a paid CIA informant, a colonel in the Guatemalan army, was involved in 2 shocking murders. When I approached Torricelli, a lawyer named Jennifer Harbury was engaged in a hunger strike in front of the White House, the final act of a campaign to find her Guatemalan guerrilla husband, Efrain Bamaca Velasquez, who had disappeared. 2,000 miles away in Guatemala, Carol Devine mourned her spouse, Michael, an American innkeeper who had been decapitated by the Guatemalan army in 1990. Torricelli, now a senator, went public with the information, and one of the most serious CIA scandals of the 1990s ensued. The administration responded by publishing the first public report of the 14-year history of the President's Intelligence Oversight Board. The IOB determined that the CIA had violated the law by lying to 2 U.S. ambassadors and Congress, and it confirmed what many had suspected. The CIA routinely recruited informants in Guatemala who murdered, tortured, and kidnapped. But the CIA punished me for telling the truth. Current Director George Tenet removed my top-level security clearance, which gave me access to the most sensitive classified information, effectively ending my career as a senior foreign policy official. Members of Congress appealed to President Clinton, but he approved the CIA's decision after my former friends and colleagues at the White House told him that denying me clearance was a technical, administrative matter. As a result of my case, a new provision in the Senate's Intelligence Authorization Bill makes it clear that Congress's right to know is no technical matter. The clause, which Congress is voting on this fall, encourages employees like me to tell Congress about illegal acts even if they are classified. Though the provision is essential for the preservation of a government of, by, and for the people, Clinton's national security advisors have concealed him to veto the entire bill if it is included. It is contrary, explained a White House statement, to the president's constitutional authority to protect national security and other privileged information. One might have thought that the first Democratic administration of the post-Cold War era would recognize the opportunity to reform an intelligence apparatus created for a different time. Instead, the Clinton White House has cycled through a series of weak CIA directors. After former Director James Woosley disciplined a CIA official for his handling of the Aldrich Ames spy case, the agency gave the official an award. When former Director John Deutsch punished agents for their performance in Guatemala, his employees donned black armbands in solidarity. Now, with Clinton's veto threat, this administration continues to capitulate to the CIA. The 1947 National Security Act created the CIA with one unfortunate side effect. It has fostered what Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan calls a culture of secrecy, in which much of the government's activity has become classified. The top secret stamp is now used not only to protect national security, but to cover up political embarrassments and misconduct. We must ask, should actions of the state be shielded from scrutiny of the people, or is the state accountable for the actions it carries out in their name? It's a question that was dear to the nation's founding fathers. This administration's answer would have astounded them. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, the first of our CIA series. If you haven't looked into some of these topics that I discussed, I would highly encourage you to start doing so and encourage your friends to do so as well. Next week, we will begin our October 1998 cover, which is back here behind me. Until then, continue to do your research, comment with anything you found interesting in this week's episode, and I will see you all next week.
George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.